There we go. Okay, I think we're good here. Let me turn over to something to look at. All right, I think we're good. So thanks. I will. Why don't I start with roll right now? Since I have a bunch of people in Zoom, I should be able to move pretty quickly through stuff, and then we'll. If people come in later, they can sort of add themselves on. So let's see. What do we got? There's a person showing up here as Nancy. Can I get a? I'm not seeing a name that matches the role. So Nancy, can you give me a full name there in chat or something so I can look you up? Oh, okay, gotcha. Thanks. And then if you're on the YouTube stream only, if you could put your first name and then the first letter of your last name, that way put it in chat. You don't have to put your full last name, but the first letter of your last name, and then I can match those as well. Okay, I probably missed a couple people because as people were coming in, it was reordering the participants list on Zoom. Oh, looks like we got a couple more over there. Let's see, Monica M. Okay, so if I call your name, that means I don't have you marked down as here, means I missed your name in the list or something when I was going through. So if I call your name, let me know that you're here so I can mark you as here. Enrique Suevas. Oh, sorry, C. Enrique C. Tori F. Keller H. Nadine L. Charlie's M. Okay. Keller, I got you. Thank you. Let's see. Charlie's M. Braden M. Hannah P. Iola R. Joshua R. Rebecca S. Okay, let's see. Nadine L. Okay, thank you. Gotcha. Let's see. Joshua R. Okay. Gotcha, Joshua. Thanks. Is there anyone else that I missed? Oh, you were here. I had you earlier. I was calling off the names of people that I didn't have as being here. So everyone else, if your name was called, you're responding. Okay, so here's where we're at. So that's good. So the end of this week is that census date that I mentioned at the beginning of the semester where I have to drop people. It's like, it's not about me being nice or not nice. It's not even a decision I get to make. It's part of the contract. I have to go through and drop people who are not sufficiently participating. So that means not attending regularly. So I can even see here's a person who has not shown up. So I'm going to flag them to take a closer look. Let's see. Let me double check. Charlize M, you're definitely not here. Okay, those are the ones that. So I have to look at two things. I have to look at role, and I have to look at participation in the class. So showing up a couple times, but having done no participation is likely to get you dropped. Participating somewhat in the as far as doing homework, but not showing up to class can get you dropped. So that's why the role is really important. So anyone who basically make sure I have you marked down, because if you get dropped from the course, then after census we generally don't add you back in unless it was a mistake on our end. And if I have you marked as not being here, then that's kind of a mistake on your end, because you have to let me know if you're here or not. So make sure you speak up of those names that I called out. I think we probably have it largely under control at this point. So I have to do that. I probably will do it I could do it as soon as Thursday is what I'll say. I can't guarantee I'll do it Thursday, but I will probably do those drops Thursday. So what I'll say is I looked over the homework this morning. Many of you have made good progress on your homework. I've seen some people have done as many as 5 of the assignments I think it's 6 assignments. Of the 6 assignments, some of you have done 5. That's fantastic. Many of you have done 3 assignments. That's pretty good. That's good. That puts you on it's due in about a week. So, 3, you've done 3 assignments. You have 3 left to go. That's pretty doable. Let's see. I'll answer that question in just a second. So, but what I would say is those of you who have done no assignments, you need to get in there and get some assignments done, and not like half of the first assignment. Like, it's not like this isn't like technicalities. I have to be able to defend the decision that I'm making. So, if I'm sitting there and the dean is like, well, why didn't you drop this person? I can't say, oh, well, they did one problem on the first assignment. That's not like, these kind of decisions get made on like a genuine basis. Are you genuinely look like you're making progress in the course? So if you've done no assignments, then I would suggest that by Thursday you get a few done. They're doing a week and you have 6 of them to do. That puts you about the pace of 1 a day anyways. So you probably should have 3 done just because the due date's approaching, right? Okay. Okay, then that's a great question. Let me circle back to that. I'm glad you asked that, and I will address that in just a moment. So that's great. I'll go over that. So the thing is about the homeworks, like this first homework set, the first chapter, I mean, I gave about 3 weeks to work on it. So I can't really extend it past that. I know sometimes what I see is I'll get a request for like, oh, I didn't get it done in time. Can you extend it? And then when I go look, they started it like 2 or 3 days before the due date. So that's not really a good reason to extend the homework because you waited 2.5 weeks to start it. So you have about a week left. I would encourage you get in there. It's reasonable to do about an assignment a day at this point. I wouldn't wait much longer, or all of a sudden it starts getting it gets difficult to for you to complete legitimately. So please don't procrastinate. there was overall a large period of time. In fact, I gave a little extra time with this first chapter because I know people are setting up the homework and getting all that kind of stuff taken care of. So, but by and large, it looks like most of the class has signed up for the homework. And of those people who signed up, most of those people have made what I would call like good progress towards getting these early assignments done. I know it's hard because I know last week our meeting was not the greatest because the power was out at my house. So I was in my office just working strictly from an iPad. It was not I get that lesson was not the best lesson that I could give but I was all my good equipment had no power to it. So that's why I give a little bit of extra time on this first round, this first chapter, understanding that all of chapter 1 is review as well. Like this is all from the prerequisite course for this class. It doesn't mean it's easy, and it doesn't mean you remember it all, but at some point you learned how to do this, so it should come back quicker. So hopefully you've been working on it, and the next week isn't going to be scary and anxiety-filled and stressful because you're trying to get it all done at the last minute. Like I mentioned last week, more people fail calculus because they can't do the algebra than that they can't do the calculus, right? The algebra a lot of times is really what gets people. So please take this chapter seriously. Make sure that you're relearning those algebra tools because it's kind of that straightforward. More people fail calculus because of algebra than because of the actual calculus, right? Not to say the calculus is easy, but it's just hard if you get in there and you can't do all the algebra to get yourself through a problem, then how could you possibly complete the calculus portion of it? Okay, so let's see. There's a couple questions here. Will you let people know when they are being dropped? I generally don't, but the people who, like, if I get there's a little nervousness, like, ooh, is he going to drop me if I don't know what's going on? If the case can be made that you're legitimately participating in the class, I'm not going to drop you, right? So if you've been attending, right, the course, the class, and you have done, what would be just considered a reasonable amount of the homework. I don't want to give a certain number because then people will do exactly that number and then wait till the last minute to do the rest. But like I say, if you've done half of an assignment, then you're probably not really on course to progress well in the class. If you have specific questions about, like, are you in danger of being dropped, then kind of two things to go along with that. One is I would encourage you to do more homework then, because the more of that homework I see done on Thursday or Friday, whenever I get around to doing drops. I think my deadline is to get it done Sunday, but they like us to do it a little early, so it kind of depends how my workload looks. I might do it as soon as Thursday. Do more homework assignments, and the more homework assignments I see done, then I can make the case, well, I didn't drop her because she did half of the homework assignments that were due or whatever, right? So, like, I have to be able to say this person is participating. If you're concerned about your own situation, feel free to come to office hours, and I'll be happy to talk with you one-on-one if I'm going to drop you. But the reality is most of the people who are going to get dropped, it's obvious that you haven't been attending class, you haven't been doing homework. If that's you as of Thursday, and you still have days to turn it around. But on Thursday, if you haven't really done much of the homework and you haven't really been showing up to class, you're likely to get a drop. Okay? And I don't want to drop anybody, right? This is a thing I have to do contract-wise. You signed up for the class. I kind of feel like you should get a shot at the class. So I'm not a big fan of dropping people, but this is part of the thing I have to do. Okay, then there was a question about the homework. Great question. So, and I'll just kind of remind everyone, you can either, you can consume these meetings however you like. There's a Zoom meeting. There's also the YouTube stream. The YouTube stream has better visuals. So when I'm showing you things, you'll see them behind me on the YouTube stream. You won't see that on Zoom. So we have two different streams here. You should be in whichever one you prefer to be in. As far as whichever way you like to consume things. I will say I did get an email yesterday with someone having difficulty getting into a meeting. I don't know. We had a full class almost. So they said the link wasn't working, but it kind of worked for everyone else. So one thing I'll say is a lot of these educational tools are a little finicky about what device you're using. I know people do use their iPhones to get into the Zoom meeting, but I also know that sometimes people's technical issues with things are when they're on their phone, like the homework. Some people will say the homework's not working for me, and then I find out they're using their phone, and as soon as they switch to a computer, good to go, right? Also, the browser can be a pain, so the browser's difficult, so don't try not to use Safari or Edge, I think they call it now. Try to use Firefox seems to play really well. Chrome is pretty good. Try to use those. Sometimes people have issues with the pop-ups. Just like watch if you're not sure how to change that and you're having that issue, watch a YouTube video. Just put in like My Math Lab pop-up settings, Chrome, if that's what you're using, and they'll show you how to go in and change your setting so that it works. Let's see, we got a question here. Okay, yeah, so there's a question there. There's another good question I'll answer in a minute. So to answer the question about the homework, so what you want to do, I'm thinking of another class where I set up a tab here. So what you want to do in Canvas is over on the left, it says My Lab and Mastering. That's your homework. So you're going to click that. And then there's this little yellow button here. If you have not signed up yet, then you should. You click that yellow button, and then for me, it takes me to the student screen. The teacher screen, and it shouldn't show anybody's name here at the front, so I should be good. And so it puts me into the class here, right? And then it shows me some information about homework assignments and stuff like that that's coming up. What you want to do is come in here for you. If you haven't signed up, then instead of giving you the screen, it's going to have you sign up. And at some point, you're going to pay the license to do the homework, and you get a free version of the e-text with that. So I'll be teaching with that sometimes. You can see it right here. It's kind of a weird sized window, so I have to have it in its own window, or I'm constantly adjusting everything. What I will tell you is the e-version of the textbook is a huge pain to use. I hate using it myself, and I actually have this, I'm skeptical of people, but I think they make it hard to use on purpose because they want more people to buy the hardback version. This online version is sort of ridiculous. So if you can get your hands on even like I think we're on 14th edition. The 13th edition is almost identical. So if you get your hands on, sometimes you can find an old edition on Amazon rental, or someone just finds an old edition. Sometimes I have students who they found textbooks like the last edition for $5, or sometimes my students will get a rental for $12 for the whole semester. Probably worth it. Much easier to use the actual book. So you'll get that when you buy the license. So you just go in, you follow the directions to set up your account. It gives you, I forget, each of our vendors does things a little bit differently. I forget if the free trial starts from when I have the class set to start, or if it's set for when you start. The publishers do it differently. So there's usually a free trial, but that might be extending since we're now 2 weeks into the semester. You might not get that anymore, but you pay the license to set it up, and then you're good to go for the course. Okay, and then what'll happen when you, one second, and then when you come in here, they'll have the assignments listed that you should be working on with due dates, and then you work on those, and then you'll work through the thing. Yeah, Saul, you have a question?
Yeah, so I'm right here registering, and it says like there's 3 options. So it's use an access code. The student access up to 24 months and 18 weeks. So I choose the 18 weeks one, right? Just to be sure.
Sure.
18
weeks will get you to the end of the semester.
And then the access code, there's no access code, is there?
If you just purchase it right through, like right as you're doing right on the website, then you don't need an access code because they know that you paid. The access code is for like if you buy it through the bookstore, then they need proof that you paid the bookstore.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks so much.
Sure. Okay, and then you can work through, then your homework assignments will show up here, and then you just work through them. So, and there's a question about, can it show up in Canvas? I have that set up in my statistics class where it's integrated, where it shows the assignments in Canvas, but there's there's issues with that as well. And it happens to work well for my statistics class to do that, just because of the way the statistics class is kind of, it's not your traditional setup for the book and lessons, the way the statistics class is done. And it works really well in there. I find for this class, it's not as helpful because there's other stuff that you get along the way. And some of that stuff I find students find really confusing. Like last semester, I had a number of students who were really confused about their grades. And so they thought they had a higher grade than they did because they were interpreting what Canvas was showing them incorrectly. And I think for a few of them, they're like, oh, my grade's pretty good. I'm not, because they were misinterpreting it. And then they didn't work as hard because they're like, well, I think I've got a B, when really they had like a D in the class. So they kind of didn't work as hard. And then when the real grade came out, they're like, oh, I thought I was like having a B, but now it looks like it's a D. So I find it's, for certain classes, it's actually better to keep those scores separate because students really start drawing. They make big assumptions. Not every student, not all of you, but in each class, there's some students that make really big assumptions about what their grade is maybe, and they're standing in the class, and then they do less work, and then we end up losing those students. So I find it's better to sort of just keep everything separate so there's less confusion about, there's less assumptions being made about these scores. Because at the end of the day, part of my job is to try to get as many people to pass this class as I can. So I know it would be more convenient to have certain features integrated into Canvas, but then it also hurts us in some other ways, unfortunately. So that's to answer that question. And then let's see. You can't hear the background noise? Are you... I'm not sure the question, Naomi, that you're asking. Just checking that if I'm watching on the YouTube, you can't hear. I can't hear you. If you're watching YouTube, I can't hear you, if that's what you're asking. Yeah, so there's no microphone going that way. Whereas you have to be a little careful to mute yourself if you're on Zoom. So if I'm understanding your question, then yeah, that's not a concern. Okay, great. So let me catch up on my list here, things I want to talk about today. So we talked about the homework. Is there any more questions with homework before we kind of move past that? No? Okay. Feel free, like I said, feel free to, you can always throw a question into chat, and then if you want, and then I can always like address it. And we can circle back if you think about something later, throw it in there, and then when there's a good chance, like a pause in what I'm trying to talk about, I can come back and answer that question. Okay? So, okay, hopefully everyone's good with the homework, and those like I say, many of you are in a great spot, kind of between 3 and 5 homework assignments done. Some of you, have a little bit more work to do this week, but it's doable. It's not overly scary. So, okay, so I've got that. I have to do census this week, which means I will be doing drop, but I really don't see that many people. I have to kind of, I'll check in with the homework again on Thursday, but I don't actually expect to drop too many people. But, just try to make sure you take care of that. Let's see, attendance. Was there anyone who came in since I took attendance? It's really important that I have you for roll because, like I say, I have to do attendance census this week. So if you come in late, really important that you let me know you were here. Okay. Okay, good question. So there's a question here on YouTube. I completed chapter 1.4 and 1.5 homework with no issues, but was curious if you wanted us to read the book regarding these sections. Only asking because after watching the videos, it says start on homework, not to read the chapter. Yeah, I don't necessarily need you to read the chapter. Not a bad idea. Okay, great. We got a couple people. Let me just check. So we got... Okay, Braden, thanks. Got you, Braden. And who was this? And Lucas, I got you too. Thanks. Okay, so let's see. What was I saying? Oh, right. So the reality is chapter 1 is really important. But you're all kind of in a different place as far as like what is chapter 1 to you. Some of you, if you just took pre-calculus or college algebra, you may sail through chapter 1 and go like, yeah, I just learned all this like a few months ago, and you just breeze right through it. Because the reality is we do some complicated algebra, but by and large, your college algebra or pre-calculus class probably had more intense algebra than what we're going to do in here. Those other two classes, college algebra and pre-calc, are also pathways to engineering calc, where they do a lot more complicated algebra, so that we kind of have to get everyone ready for that. But the algebra we do in here, by and large, will mostly be the basics of algebra: factoring, solving equations, a little bit with logarithms and exponentials, but we don't even get that fancy with logs and exponents, so it's not too bad. So you want to have a really solid foundation of those basics. You don't have to get into the really, like, there was a lot of weird, obscure stuff. You want to know your basics. Some of the stuff that I plan to talk about today, we'll see how much time I have, but asymptotes and those kinds of things with rational functions, you kind of want to remember those basics, but it's not usually quite as deep as what we had in your pre-calculus class, right? So some of you may be like, yeah, I'm breezing through chapter 1. I just did pre-calc. This is all review. This is easy. Some of you may not have taken this material for 2 or 3 years or more years, right? Some people may not have taken this for 15 years. So it's going to come back a lot slower. So as far as chapter 1, it's kind of a whatever you need in order to be successful in the class. So if you're finding that you're easily moving through chapter 1, then you're probably okay, right? If you can do the problems on the homework and you feel comfortable with it, that you can do that in future problems in a context of a larger problem, you're probably okay. You don't need to read the chapter. If you're struggling, then you might need to spend more time with the book. There are some concepts that come up that you did not see in pre-calculus that are more business applications, because this is essentially a business calculus class, right? We call it applied calc because there's always a couple of biology students, like usually 1 or 2 biology students in this class, because we don't have enough students for a biology calculus class. And most schools will take business calc instead of biology calc. So if you can't get your biology calc, they'll take business calc instead. So we end up with 1 or 2 biology students in here. But by and large, probably, how many students do we have? 33. Probably at least 31 of you are business related in some way or another. Economics, business, accounting, these types of things that are generally business related in one way or another. So some of those concepts, like we talked about last time, we looked at the revenue function, cost function, profit functions. Those you're going to need to know how to do. Price demand equations, price supply equations, we're going to look at those a little bit today, assuming we have time. Those are important to know. So those are a couple things that you'll kind of miss. There's a few ideas like that you'll miss from the first chapter, but we'll be talking about those throughout the semester anyways. So if you are more or less done with the chapter, you might just kind of look through chapter 1, and those ones that look like they're business related problems, or you see the price demand equation, or you see a cost function, you might want to look at those. That certainly would be beneficial to you to look at those problems and start to wrap your brain around, how do I construct a cost function again? Remember last time we talked about the cost function? Sometimes someone's problem's just going to give you the cost function and say, here's C of X, go use it. And sometimes they're going to say, here's the fixed cost, here's the variable cost, figure out the cost function. And you have to figure that out. And we worked through that last time. So those are concepts that you're going to have to be comfortable with that you probably did not see in pre-calc. And I'll be covering them in class, but also you want to be comfortable with it. I do still see students at the end of the semester who don't understand how to construct a cost function. They don't understand how to construct a revenue function. And I would say for someone going into business, that's a really bad sign if you still can't construct those functions towards the end of the semester. First of all, just for being able to pass the class, that's not a good sign. But also just you're going into business, but you don't understand revenue and cost, that's not a good sign at all, because you can't really understand much of anything if you don't understand cost and revenue. So so the bottom line, as far as like, should you be reading the chapter, it's up to you. If you feel like reading the chapter would help you, then you should. If you feel like reading the chapter won't help you, then you shouldn't, right? It's sometimes the people who need to read the chapter have the most difficulty reading the chapter, and then the people who are, strongest with being able to read the chapter kind of get it anyway. So it just, every person is different, and it just kind of depends on you individually. But it's not a bad idea to read the chapter. Okay, let me see. Where am I? Okay, couple things I wanted to mention. So hopefully you got the update from the school about going back to campus. This is when this class was created, it was created as an on-campus class. We will be meeting eventually in Science 353. So when the semester first started, they put us on online for 2 weeks. But even back then, even before the semester started, they were talking about probably this is going to get extended. So just realize it's probably not just 2 weeks. It's probably going to be past that. So you should have received the new email from the school saying, yes, it's been extended. So I hate to throw out dates unless I'm looking at them, but mid-February is approximately when we'll go back. So check your school emails. There's a whole thing about when we're going to go back. At that point, you will need to be on campus. You will need to be able to access campus. We can't do a thing where students signed up for an on-ground course, but because they don't want to get vaccinated, then we make it online for them. That doesn't really work. You have to find an online class at that point. So if you're in an on-ground class, it's an on-ground class, and you have to be able to attend the class. So I would say make sure that you're getting things taken care of, so by mid-February, you can come on campus and be approved to come into the classroom, because the COVID protocols are being taken very seriously. It's not like, oh, well, I have a sympathetic teacher, so they're not going to really check. Like, we have to check. Do you have the wristband? I have to have the wristband, or I'm not allowed in the classroom. You have to have the wristband, or you're not allowed in the classroom. That's going to go everywhere. So if you're not ready for that, you don't have your vaccine card submitted to the school, or you didn't get your last vaccine or something, please take care of that now, because it could set you back. Once we go back on campus, I won't be Zooming anymore, because I'll be in the classroom with you, hopefully with you, giving a lesson. So you can't just hop on YouTube anymore and then watch the stream. You have to come to class and participate, because it's an on-ground class. So please make sure that you're getting ready for that, because like I was saying, they kind of knew when they first told us that the class was going to be online for 2 weeks. They were already telling us they were going to extend it probably to early to mid-February. But now what I'm hearing is the campus is pretty confident that mid-February date is actually when we're going to go back, right? And if you pay attention to it at all, the COVID numbers for the last couple weeks, they do seem to have peaked and are starting to go down. Hospitalizations follow. So the hospitalizations may still be going up, but infections seem to have peaked and are starting to drop, which is what the scientists sort of predicted. That seems to be happening, which leads me to believe they are probably not going to extend this any further. So make sure you're prepared to come to campus when you're supposed to, right? Which will be in a couple weeks. When that happens, so the first test, remember our first test is after chapter 2. There will be an in-class test. The test will be paper and pencil in class, and you'll take, we'll talk about it more as that approaches, but just remember it's not an online test. Some of you have been taking online tests for the last couple of years. A class like this especially, it's really hard in an online test to make sure that people are taking the test in an ethical way. So the best way we can take care of that is a paper and pencil in classroom test. And, you'll take it just like you could before. You can have a calculator during the test. The calculator cannot be your phone. I want to make sure everyone understands this. You cannot use your phone as the calculator, and it should be fairly obvious why you can't have your phone out during a test. If you want to use a basic calculator, you can. If you want to use a scientific calculator, you can. If you want to use a graphing calculator, you can. You can use those graphing calculators as long as they're not part of a phone, right? If you go, oh, well, I have a graphing calculator app on my phone, well, that would violate the no phones policy during the test. So you cannot use an app on your phone as your calculator, but you can use a calculator as a calculator, if you like. I tend to write tests that can be done without a calculator, but sometimes it's way easier if you have that calculator. Okay. It's a nice thing to have. Same thing with the stats class. It can be nice to have that calculator because it can do some stuff for you that's convenient. So I don't require a calculator. You will not be able to use notes. I tend to write my tests in a way where if you know the material and you understand the homework problems, you should be able to do the test problems. Okay, so you generally shouldn't need notes. The things that you'd kind of have to remember are the things that you should absolutely know inside and out anyways. Revenue functions, cost functions, profit functions, those kinds of things. Like you might go, oh, I forget how to calculate that. That's something that if you're in this class, you should just know it. It should be like the way you know your name. How do you calculate a cost function? Oh, you figure out the fixed cost and then you add the variable cost and you put an X on the variable cost term. That's how you just have to know it. Otherwise, you're going to spend this whole semester not understanding anything. So that's a good question. Okay, there's a question about the return date. Check the email to be sure, so don't quote me on this, but I believe our return date is supposed to be Monday, February 14th. But double check in your email because when I'm doing stuff off the top of my head, sometimes I get numbers wrong, like I mix up a date or something, so verify. But I believe Monday the 14th is our first day. As of today, that's the plan, is our first day back in the classroom will be Monday. Actually, we meet on Tuesday, so I guess that would be the 15th. Tuesday the 15th, I guess, is the first day our class would meet. Okay. Let's see. So you're not able to use notes before the test. We have a study guide. Yeah, you'll have a practice test before. You'll have a practice test before the test, which is a chance to test yourself on how well you know how to do certain problems. It also is a way for what I sometimes do. I usually try to do this in class, but that's when we have a lot more time. I don't know if we'll have time for this, but I usually try to have time in class to work on the study guide. Theoretically, this is the perfect version. I give you all guys, everybody, the practice test. You work on it by yourself. Then you meet as a group and answer the questions you couldn't do, and then you get ready for the test. What sometimes happens is people don't work on it till they get together in the group, but then you don't really know how much you could do and how much other people in the group did, and then there's a tendency to overestimate your own ability to do these problems and then do poorly on the test. So it's always really good. Work on the practice test for yourself and make a little note on every problem. Oh, I nailed this one. I know I got this one right. This one, I have no idea. This one, I think I did pretty good, but I might have made some mistakes. Make a little note for each problem. And then when you get together in the group, then you can see. I'm pretty sure I got number 2 right. Did you get the same thing for number 2? You did? Oh, good. It looks like we know what we're talking about. I had problems on number 3. Were you able to get through number 3? Oh, you were? Can you show me how to do it? And then you help each other through. This is... when the students who take this seriously and they work on it before meeting up, they do really well, right? The students who kind of show up and I don't know, I'm in this group, but I didn't do anything. I'm just going to write down what you all say. That's not really, it doesn't do any good. You're just going to end up getting everything wrong on the test. So yeah, you will have a practice test, and I will probably give you at least some time to work on it in class so you can compare, but it'll be short. It won't be enough time just because we're limited in time. It won't be enough time for you to go over the whole test with each other. But like I say, the ones where you're all confused on number 7, it'll give you some time to work it out and help each other out. You're all welcome to form study groups anyways. This is one of the classes where usually at least one study group forms, where there's 5 motivated students who are let's get together and form a study group. That's a great reason to get together and form a study group is before the test. You all bring your practice test that you've all worked on, and you spend 2-3 hours working on it together. And then those people generally leave like knowing how to do all the problems. They're like, yeah, we worked it all out. Like everyone's questions get answered and that kind of stuff because you work through it. So I don't force you to form study groups, but like I say, the students who form study groups generally get A's in the class. Not because I give them A's, because they earn an A, right? Because they know what they're doing. So let's see. I don't know if I've answered all the questions here. Let's see, where are we? So you will get a study guide, no notes. You can use a calculator. Oh, here's one I missed. Question about the homework. Is there a way to get a discount off the $75 bundle? I believe there is not. So you're looking for the bundle through the bookstore. Is that what you're asking about? So you can buy it through the bookstore, or you can just buy directly through the website. It changes every semester, so I don't know what the license costs this semester. You only need the 18-week one. You don't need 2 years of the license. And like I say, even if you can find a cheap version of like the 13th edition, that one's fine too. So it just kind of depends how you put it together. But I don't know of any like coupons or anything. I know a lot of times when students go elsewhere and they try to find a cheaper price for the license, a lot of times they end up accidentally buying the wrong license, which sucks that you just spent money on something you can't use. The publishers are making it really hard. They have like 5 versions of everything. Like you'd think, oh, well, don't I just need to know the title of the book and, you know, the authors and the edition? That's how it used to be. But now this book that we're working from, the current version has like 5 versions. And so if you accidentally buy the wrong one, sometimes the license doesn't work right. So what I usually recommend my students do is just buy it right through the website, because then there's no confusion. Even through our bookstore, like my not my stats class, my math for meds class, the bookstore completely screwed up my book orders this semester. They say it was their system went weird during a software update, which I guess possibly that's true, but they totally screwed up my books, and it's kind of in chaos over there. So the easiest thing is to just, when it asks you to pay with a credit card, just pay right there, and then you're good to go. And if you want to track down a cheap 13th edition or something, then you can. But you can buy it in whatever form you want. Okay, so you can have a calculator during the test. No phones under any conditions during the test. There's always someone who comes up and asks me, like, can I use the graphing calculator app on my phone? No. Just no. There's no. The phones are just too. I mean, I don't have to tell you. You all know what you could do with a phone while you're taking a test. So the answer is no. So I got that. Okay, one thing to show you. Actually, 2 things, I guess. In the meantime, this won't be as helpful when we're in class together, but this might be helpful when you're working on stuff at home and you're trying to get stuff done. One is this website called Wolfram Alpha. So what is Wolfram Alpha? Wolfram Alpha is a computation engine. So what is that? Well, Google is a search engine. Google goes out and finds things that are on the web. So if you want to know, I want to learn how to make my dog do a backflip, then Google will find you the website that teaches you how to make your dog do a backflip, right? Wolfram Alpha is a computation engine. That is, they want to be the place you go for computations. So Google is where you go to find things. Wolfram Alpha is where you go to compute things. Okay. Now, what I will say is be careful. Don't let Wolfram Alpha, like, it's easy to get lazy and let Wolfram Alpha do too much work for you, and then you're not going to know how to do it yourself. So Wolfram Alpha can be very helpful for checking your work. If you're like getting something wrong and you're like, I feel like I'm doing this right, check it on Wolfram Alpha. There's a number of things that you can use Wolfram Alpha to help you do. So for instance, if you think you're factoring something right, so we'll just go, let's see, I want to factor x squared minus 4, and we hit equals, and it calculates. And this is free. You don't have to. They're going to try to sell you a subscription to Wolfram Alpha. Nothing we do in this class requires the subscription. That's if you're like, if you're working in like a research facility, you might want a subscription to Wolfram Alpha. For what we're doing, you don't need it. And they say, oh, You wanted me to factor x squared minus 4. Here's your answer. So you can check your work on here. Again, please be disciplined and don't use Wolfram Alpha to do your work for you, because what's going to happen is when you sit down and take the test, you're going to get every problem wrong because you won't know how to do it yourself. So this can be very helpful when you're stuck and you're confused. Use Wolfram Alpha to like basically use it as a learning tool for yourself when you're stuck on something to help you move through a problem. Don't use it as something to do the homework for you. Right? I know there's students who will try to use Wolfram Alpha to do a bunch of problems for them on the homework, and then they're not going to know how to do it on the test, and they'll fail the class. So please, kind of be disciplined about how you use Wolfram Alpha in order to help you through the class. But if you don't have a big fancy calculator, Wolfram Alpha can help you with some of that stuff. Okay, it can help you sort of figure out what, so for instance, you want to solve x squared equals 7. You're having you tried to solve x squared minus x squared equals 7 by hand, and you're not sure if you did it right. Well, check it on here. And they say, oh, well, here's your answer, plus or minus square root of 7. And you're like, well, that's what I got, so I guess that part of the problem's right. My mistake must be somewhere else. And then you can kind of help figure out where the problem is. So it's just kind of on you to, hold yourself up to the higher standard of, not using this as a way to do less work, but as a learning tool to help you do work. Also, we will be using graphs a lot in this class. A lot of calculus is you have some algebra, and then you use that information to work on your graph. And then you look at your graph and use that information to help your algebra. We are constantly going back between graphing and algebra. And by algebra, I'm including calculus in that. Like we all know what a graph looks like, and then we know what it looks like when you're on your page, like doing computations. You're going to be going back and forth to that all the time. So you need a good graphing tool, and you might have a graphing calculator. I'm not requiring you to buy a TI-84. They're expensive, and many of you won't use it after this semester. So I'm not saying you need to go sink whatever it is now, $120 into a TI-84. You don't need to do that. If you know someone who has a TI-84 and they're not using it this semester, say, can I borrow that for a semester? It might be helpful to you. But if not, you can go to Desmos, which is a free website. It's a great graphing utility that doesn't require you to sign up or anything. So you just go in there, graphing calculator, and then you want to graph x cubed minus x squared plus 3. You just type it out, and there it is, graphing it. X cubed. And then there you've got your nice graph, and then you can kind of look at it and see where the points are. That can be very helpful because, again, if you're doing the work right, you're going to spend a lot of times, you're going to start off with the problem, you're going to do some work and go, okay, now I can update my graph. Oh, look what I just learned from the graph. Now I'm going to try this thing on the algebra. Okay, I'm going to work on it. Now go back to the graph. You're going to be going back and forth, so it's helpful to you to have a nice graphing tool. You don't want to be sitting here like plotting points for everything you try to graph. That's a pain. Because you're going to be plotting lines, these things called tangent lines, and there's secant lines, and all sorts of stuff's going to come up. So those are two tools that you can use. Again, I encourage you to use them as a learning tool, not as a this is going to help me get my homework done faster tool, because those are that's not helpful. It actually will end up hurting you on the exam. I've mentioned the TI-84 graphing calculator, so if you have one of those, great. Are you allowed to use other graphing calculators? Yeah, but graphing calculators are not like each other. Like the TI-84 is kind of the standard that's used. That's like the default that's used by most schools. Occasionally a student ends up with a Casio graphing calculator or an HP graphing calculator. Those are fine, but they're nothing like the TI-84. I mean, it's like they were designed on different planets or something. That, like, if you know the TI-84 inside and out and someone hands you the Casio, you probably can do nothing on the Casio because the menus are different. What they call things is different. The whole set is like completely different. So you can use a different graphing calculator if that's what you can get your hands on, but I'm not going to be able to help you with a Casio or an HP because I don't know those very well. If you come to me with the TI-84 anything we do in this class, I can show you exactly how to do it on a TI-84. But that's up to you if you know, how you want to do that. Okay, so let's see. We got Wolfram Alpha and Desmos out of the way. Okay, so before we get into some math here, are there any follow-up questions or anything that people want to ask before we get into some math? No? Doesn't look like it. Okay, feel free to throw a question up there if you need to. Is the 83 calculator okay? Probably. It probably will do the majority of what you need to do. I haven't seen one in years, and so if I remember right, they're a little different than the 84. I may not remember how to do certain things on it. But the nice thing about the Texas Instruments one is anything you want to know how to do, and actually this is true with the Casios and the HPs as well. There are YouTube videos that show you how to do whatever you want. So if you go, you know, you're in there and you're like, you just go on YouTube and you're like TI-84, graphing calculator, asymptotes or something like that. Like you can find a video that shows you how to do what you want. If you want to do a regression, they mention regression in chapter 1, but we don't actually use regressions very much in this class. But whatever it is you're looking for, you can just do TI-84, regression, calculation, and then there'll be a video that shows you exactly what buttons to push. So an 83, I believe, will get you through what you need for this class, but I may have forgotten how to use them myself, just so you know. And if you're going out to purchase one, if you're like, yeah, that's fine, I can afford a calculator, it's worth it to me, they try to get you to buy like the Nspire or to upgrade. You don't need to spend any, for this class, you don't need anything stronger than a TI-84. So I would say it's, unless you're going to be, you know, using a calculator for years and years to come, you don't need to spend the extra money for the like super powered calculators. A TI-84 is fine. And like I said, you don't even have to do that. But if you were in the market for one, I would say just get the TI-84, maybe the one with color. It's kind of convenient when the color screen. But like the fancy ones where you have different face plates and all that kind of stuff, you don't need it. Okay? Okay. So with that said, and I think, was there a question earlier? Is there, since some of you have done the homework, like I went through and I picked particular problems that I was going to go over, but are there particular homework problems that anyone wants to see, that anyone needs to see? If so, throw them up there and I'll either go over them or at least give you some hints or some suggestions or whatever. Otherwise, I'm just going to go through and pick the ones that I looked at. So let's see, we have about 35 minutes left. Let me just try to pick the ones that I think we'll need to go over. A couple things from 1.3. I think I picked these, if it's the ones I'm thinking of, mainly because they have a business application that you may not have seen before. And so wanted to talk about that. Yeah. So let's not do this one. We can come back to that if there's time. So example 4 on page 38 is really about finding the vertex for a parabola. So, you know, in your pre-calculus class or college algebra class, we worked on taking a parabola that was in standard form and converting it to vertex form. Excuse me. And converting it to vertex form. I'll come back to that problem if there's enough time, but I don't think there will be. It's pretty straightforward. Also, there's that other formula of negative b over 2a that we learned in, it's kind of a shortcut that we learned in college algebra pre-calc about how to get that vertex. Because if you think about your vertex being a parabola, so let me put, for those of you on YouTube, let me remind you what a parabola looks like. Something like this. A parabola kind of has that U shape, right? Well, if it's an upward parabola, then it has a minimum. That vertex is the minimum of the function. And if it's a downward facing parabola, then the vertex is the maximum. Well, in business, you oftentimes want to min-max stuff, right? You want to maximize profit. You want to minimize cost. Those are two examples of why you would want to do something like that. So being able to figure out where that vertex is helpful, right? So you'll have problems like that. We're going to learn a whole new set of techniques. Part of what calculus is being able to apply analysis to functions that we dealt with in pre-calculus, but we have like a stronger set of tools for one of the things we'll do is find maximums and minimums, right? Right now you can find a maximum and minimum for a parabola, but what if we give you something way more complicated? You know, something like x minus 2, x plus 1, x minus 5, x, something like this. I mean, you get this really complicated graph that we're looking at here. This thing has a bunch of maximums and minimums. Here's a minimum, but it's not a minimum for the whole function, but it's a minimum in this area. Here's a maximum right here, but it's not a maximum for the whole function. That's one of the things we're going to do in this class is develop tools for finding things that are maximums and minimums around our graph. So we're going to build all that and kind of have some better tools. One of the things I want to show you, and I'm going to move through these problems a little quicker than I would prefer, but we're kind of running out of time here. So I want to make sure I show you some of these. So for example, oops, did I go too far? Here we go. Yeah, I went one page too far, and then this is that e-text, and I have to keep the window so big that it actually gets in the way. Otherwise, it cuts off part of the screen. It's, like I say, it's really a pain the way this is set up. So we have supply and demand, which are pretty important for you to understand if you're going into any type of business endeavor. So here we have an equation where they want us to figure out the price-supply equation and the price-demand equation. So remember, the price-supply equation relates the price of an item to the demand. If you at a certain price, how many units are people going to buy, right? Generally, the lower price something is, the more people will buy it. The higher price something is, the less people will buy it, right? This makes sense if you just think about it when you decide you're going to buy a television and you think, okay, I've looked around, Costco has that one TV at that price, I'm going to go buy it. And then you get there and it's lower price than you expected, it's $100 cheaper than you thought it was going to be. You're not going to be disgusted and be like, oh, forget it, I'm not buying this thing, it's $100 cheaper than I thought, right? That doesn't make any sense. Why? Because at a lower price, more people buy it, not less. So as price drops, demand will increase. Or sorry, got to make sure I'm talking about the right one, right? So the price supply and price demand have the opposite relationship. So when you go to buy a TV, if it's cheaper, you're still going to buy it. If it's more expensive, you might not, right? So that you can see how supply sort of affects that price, and then sorry, I keep saying the wrong one. That's demand, and then supply. If you're the company, think about it from the company's perspective. At a certain price, how many are you willing to supply to the market? Well, you want the price supply to match the price demand, because that means the number of, at a certain price that it's selling for, then the number of people willing to buy it matches the number of units that you're willing to supply, and that's good business because, and we can see it in a picture over here. We can see our price supply equation, right? And then our price demand equation. Where these things meet, they call that the equilibrium point, which, remember, the x value is the quantity, so that's saying 280 units, which may be 280,000 units. It depends what your unit is. 280 and 8.6 is your price, so $8.60 is the price. Always, whenever you're doing an application problem in this class, always stop and ask yourself, what does my x value represent? What does my y value represent? I see a lot of students memorize how to solve an equation, and then they're like, but how do I finish it? What does any of this mean? Those are two questions that you should ask yourself right out of the gate. What is my x value? What is my y value? If you don't understand what those variables are, then solving that equation doesn't do you any good, right? What's the point if you don't know what to do? So here, the x value is a quantity, and the y value is a price. So just kind of saying that to yourself will really help clarify what you're working on. Oh, my y value is my price, $8.60, and 280, that's the number of units that we're willing to supply, and also the number of units that we expect people to buy at this given price. You don't want to supply more than people are willing to buy, because that means your product is sitting on the shelves, or worse, it's sitting in a warehouse, out in the middle of nowhere. If inventory is bad usually for business, because you're paying for some warehouse facility to store your product. So that's not good. What you want is that product to sell immediately, and you don't have to worry about paying for it to be stored. If you're paying for storage, that's cutting into your profits, right? So you really want that demand and that supply to meet each other, and that's why you have to figure out the right price that's going to make those happen. We could price things better we could price things more expensive if we wanted to, but demand would drop. So at that point, we would be leaving sales on the table, because there's people who would buy our product, but we're charging too much, and so they're not going to be willing to buy it. Now, on the other hand, we could drop the price a lot, and we would sell a lot more units, but then maybe we're not making enough off each sale to make it worth it, right? So you really want to understand how these things sort of weigh, how they weigh each other, how they affect each other in this way. So here's the graph that kind of makes sense of it all. Stare at this a little bit when you're at home, trying to make sense of it if you need to. But also, where did those equations come from? They did not give us these equations in the problem. So where did this come from? Well, again, I'm kind of moving a little quicker because there's some basics I want to talk about in these problems, but we probably don't have time to go over the actual mechanics. The good news is the algebra involved here is like one of the first things you learn in beginning algebra. So it's not that complicated. It might look complicated when you look at the problem and go, that doesn't look familiar. But that's part of understanding the business part of things, makes it easier for you to go, oh, that's just the equation of a line. I remember that's the slope formula right there. I remember that. That's easy, right? So that's what you want to do. So here we have, at a price of $9 per box, the supply of oranges, the supply is 320,000 boxes, and the demand is 200,000 boxes. At a price of $8.50 per box, the supply is 270,000 boxes, and the demand is 300,000 boxes. So a couple things here about setting up this problem well. One thing you want to notice that, let's see, not letting me scroll here. Let's move this up. There we go. See how in their calculation they're not using 270,000 or 320,000? They're just saying our unit is 1,000 boxes of oranges, right? That saves you from having to write so many zeros along the way, but you should probably write that down and remember, oh, these values are thousands of boxes. It's not boxes, it's thousands of boxes. So you just kind of remember that for yourself, and then your numbers are a little cleaner to work with. Also notice, what was I just going to say? Oh, again, if you're going to work through this problem, you have to know what's the X value and what's the Y value. So going back to how our price demand equation works over here, and this will be pretty standard when you do these. So it's not like it's different every single time. You just kind of learn how these work. Remember, with our price supply equation and our price demand equation, the X value was a quantity that is either being demanded or supplied. So the X is a quantity and the Y is a price. So why is that helpful? Well, because when we go back here, we have to know which of the values they're giving me in the problem are X values and which of the problems are Y values, right? So in other words, $9 is the price. They're telling us a price of $9. So now I have to ask myself, is that an X value or a Y value? Well, according to the chart we just looked at, the price is a Y value. We go, okay, price is a Y value. Okay, good. And then what are these? Well, these are amounts. So the amount for our price supply equation is 320. That's how that 320 gets there. We're using thousands of boxes, and this is the quantity, so that's an X. So that means our first point is 320, 9. That's a point on our price supply equation. And then we get another point here, 200, 9. That's a point on our price demand equation. Okay, so the first sentence gives us 1 point on the two different lines. And you can tell because they tell you which one's supply and which one's demand, right? And then they give you the information a different way. Oh, at a price of $850, then the supply is 270, so you got your Y value and your X value, but also here's a point for the demand. The demand will be 300 at a price of $850. So what you really have there is you have 4 points, and the 2 supply points go together, the 2 demand points go together, and remember what we did in algebra, given 2 points, find the equation of the line that goes through that. Remember all these problems in algebra? Here's 2 lines, find the equation of the line that goes through it. That's exactly what you're doing here. So what is this right here? That's your slope equation. Remember y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1? It's exactly what this is. They took in this case, the 2 points for our price supply, and then they figured out the slope and said, oh, the slope is 0.01. So all that work we did in algebra of finding equations of lines that go through 2 points, you're actually using it now. You're putting it to work in a meaningful way. So that's how you get your slope. Remember, we want things to be we're used to it being y equals mx plus b, but in this case it's p equals mx plus b because p is price, right? So, and then they do the same thing with the demand. Well, let's finish this one first. Now, there's a few ways you can finish this off. You can either use your point slope form equation of the line that was, remember, y2 minus y1 equals m times x minus x1, that whole thing. You can use that to finish out the problem. Or, the way a lot of times I teach it in my class, you can also use the y equals mx plus b form to finish this out. Okay, so, and I know some of this might seem familiar to a lot of you. Some of it might not. You can watch a YouTube video easily to remember how to find if you just go on YouTube and find the equation of a line through 2 points, they'll just walk you right through it, okay? So that's how they get to the price supply equation. You were given 2 data points in the problem. You had to figure out what those data points were, create points out of them, find the slope, find the equation of the line, but now you have it. You have your price supply equation, and then you can put it here on your graph. Graph the price supply equation right there. And then you go through, you do the same thing with the price demand equation. You get your slope, so you calculate the slope same way, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Throw it in one of your forms of lines, solve for the price demand equation, and then you've got that on here. When you graph it, you can see what that equilibrium point is. Remember, the equilibrium point is the point at which, for one price, the amount supplied matches the amount demanded. That's sort of where you want to live if you're a business. You want to live at that point where all the product that you make is selling. It gets sold, right? Otherwise, you need to adjust your price. Why would you want to create product that isn't going to sell? That's not good business, right? You want to reach that zone where it's kind of right. So again, you can easily just go on YouTube and find an equation on how to do the algebra part. But I'm trying to give you the business perspective of it, because I know a lot of students, like I have many students who can solve the equations and like get the equations of the line, but they're like, I don't get price supply, I don't get price demand. So that's kind of why I'm talking about that. It's a little harder to find videos that explain that kind of stuff. Okay, 20 minutes left. Let's see. Yeah, and we just have their terms. The equilibrium point is where those 2 lines intersect. And if you ever get confused, because I get confused sometimes, like price supply equation, price demand equation, and I have to stop and think, okay, let's see, how is price related to supply? Oh, okay, so if supply goes up, this is what's going to happen to price, like, scarcity and all that kind of stuff that you talk about in your class. You will be talking about a lot of this stuff in your classes. Marginal revenue, we're going to talk about, like marginal revenue, marginal cost, that kind of stuff. We'll figure out how to calculate that, not for a few more weeks, but that kind of businessy talk will come up, and we'll be able to apply math to it in a way that's helpful. Okay, let's see. Where's the next one I want to talk about? Oh, right. Let me draw your attention to So in the book, it's page 54. Let's go there. Is it giving me the option to jump? This is a... All of the e-texts for these publishers are bad, but this one seems especially difficult to navigate. I got to figure out where that... If it was a bigger jump, I would do it a different way, but in this case, it's probably easier to click. Okay, so... Oops. It's not matching up perfectly. One more page. Here we go. Rational functions. These are going to come up a lot in this class. A rational function is a fraction that has polynomials in it. I think if I remember right, we talked a little bit about them last time. Finding the domain, all that stuff that you did in the prerequisite class, we're going to use a lot of it. So it's really important. One thing that comes up and plays a large role is the asymptotes. So you always need to be able to identify the domain of a rational function, and you're going to need to be able to identify the asymptotes. Here's some good news. If you understand the asymptote stuff from pre-calculus or from college algebra, then you're going to have a much easier time with the calculus version of that, because it's essentially the same thing, but with like a calculus coding on it. Like it's the same concepts. So if you understand conceptually, you'll be fine. But we have a new set of vocabulary for the terms that we used in pre-calculus, right? They were getting us ready for these calculus tools, but we weren't ready for the vocabulary yet. So like example 2 in the book is pretty good, where it's talking about the things you need to be able to do when you have a rational function. Find the domain, find the x and y intercepts, find the vertical asymptotes. If there is a horizontal asymptote, find that. We're going to be introducing a thing right at the beginning of chapter 2 called limits, and it's a very big topic because we actually have like 4 different things that we call limits. One of them is going to involve horizontal and vertical asymptotes, but in a whole new language of calculus, a whole new way of doing things. So, but if you understand from pre-calculus basically what a vertical asymptote is and how to find the equation for it, what a horizontal asymptote is and how to find the equation for it, you're going to find the calculus equivalent really easy, because it's just a matter of like matching the new vocabulary to the idea that you already understand. So there's a... Where did they put it? There's a chart in here. Oh, it's coming up. So it's on page, what page is this labeled? 56. So page 56 of the textbook, there is this, where it's... So in the book, when you see this kind of gray box, kind of a bluish gray box that has vertical and horizontal asymptotes of rational functions, whenever you see this blue-gray box, that usually means something important is happening in there. They're telling you something that is important that you understand how to do. In this case, they're talking about horizontal and vertical asymptotes, and they kind of remind you what they are. So they say for vertical asymptotes, there's 2 cases: that they have no real zero in common, c is a real number, d of c equals 0, then the line x equals c is a vertical asymptote. So let's look at an example of that. What is that talking about? So if I've got y equals... Come on, what's going on? Wow, that was a hard to fix typo. Okay, so here we have, you can see on the graph, a rational function. It's got a vertical asymptote right here at x equals -5. It's got a vertical asymptote at x equals +5. And it looks like we're getting a horizontal asymptote in here at what, x equals 1, I believe? Or y equals 1. I mean, yeah, it looks like that's going right in there. You want to be able to identify those pretty quickly. We did a lot of that in college algebra class. So hopefully you remember how to do that. This chart that's on page 56, we're basically going to see an equivalent of that chart in chapter 2, except when it's appearing here in chapter 1, it's talking to you in the same language that you used in college algebra. The version that we see in chapter 2 is going to talk about limits, and it's going to use the language of calculus, but it's the same concepts. It's the same, like the same exact information that's in this box is the same exact information that's going to be in the box in chapter 2, except it's in a calculus setting. So if you can remember how to calculate asymptotes now, then that part's going to be a lot easier for you when we get to that chapter. So let me just kind of review what happens. You get a vertical asymptote when you get 0 in the denominator of a rational function for a fully simplified rational function. You can get weird situations like, let's see if we do, let me turn this off. If we get y equals x squared minus, x squared minus x minus 12 over x minus 4. Will that do it? Yeah, so see this rational function here, x squared minus x minus 12 over x minus 4. When you graph it, you go, wait, isn't that just a line? That looks like a line. No, because remember, x squared minus x minus 12 factors as x minus 4, x plus 3. So notice how we have an x minus 4 in the top and bottom. The x minus 4 cancels out, and what you really get right here at 4, like graphing utilities don't usually show this, but this is where you'd have that little hollow hole right here, that hollow dot. The graphing utility doesn't do that, but you as the intelligent person doing calculus needs to recognize, oh, there'd be a little hole right there. That's not what we're going to deal with most of the time. It's like a weird thing that comes up every once in a while. Most of the time what we're going to deal with is this. There's no common factors in the top and bottom. The things that make your denominator 0 are where you're going to get vertical asymptotes. So for instance, see what makes the denominator 0 up here? 5, x equals 5 and x equals negative 5. And sure enough, that's where we get our vertical asymptotes, is at x equals 5 and x equals negative 5. So the way you determine where a vertical asymptote is occurring is you set the denominator equal to 0 and you solve that. Okay? So you just kind of want to remember that. Some people set the numerator equal to 0. That's different. That's finding intercepts. Intercepts are different than asymptotes. Okay? So what about the horizontal asymptote? How do I figure out what that one is? Because that's going to come up as well. Well, there's a rule, and it's actually, if you think about it, it's pretty easy to remember this rule. So let's see. Let's do x cubed minus, x cubed minus x squared minus 5 over x to the 4th minus 1. Oops, I hit the wrong button. This is what we call a slant or oblique asymptote, where it's at an angle. We usually don't have to worry about those too much. It's another one of those weird cases that comes up every once in a while. So let me change that to a 4. That's what I meant to do. So you can see we have a horizontal asymptote right here. Well, how do I know what that is exactly? It's hard to tell exactly where my asymptote is. In this case, it's going to be y equals 0. How do I know that? Well, what was that? Did you have a question? Oh, okay. Oh, okay. No problem. Okay, so if we look on that box on page 56 that I'm talking about, it says the case we're currently looking at is case 1. If the degree of the numerator is less than the degree of the denominator, then y equals 0 is your horizontal asymptote. And that's what we have here. The degree of my numerator is less than the degree of my denominator. So I have degree 4 in the denominator, degree 3 in the numerator. So why does that give us a horizontal asymptote of 0? Well, think about it this way. Start plugging in really, really big values of x, because that's what horizontal asymptotes are concerned about, is what we called end behavior in college algebra. What's happening at the ends of my graph? Well, at the ends of my graph, I have really, really big values of x, 1,000,000, 1,000,000,000,000, one with 100 zeros after it, really, really big values. Well, think about plugging a really big number into this rational expression. The denominator is always going to be significantly bigger than the numerator because you're putting a really big number in there. Well, when you raise a big number to the fourth power, that's going to dwarf a really big number raised to the third power, right? So what happens is the denominator grows at a faster rate than the numerator. So now it goes back to like your pre-algebra fraction work. What happens when you have a big denominator and a little numerator? That gives you a tiny number, right? So it shrinks down towards 0. So that's why if you have, so see, I'm telling you, you shouldn't just memorize these because I see students memorize it and then they mix them up on the test and they choose the wrong one. If you can understand it and go, oh, let's see, big denominator, small numerator, back to like when I learned fractions, oh, that means a small number, this is shrinking down towards 0. And you'd be right, okay? Another case is, case 2 is if the degree of the numerator equals the degree of the denominator, then y equals a divided by b is the horizontal asymptote where a and b are your leading coefficients. That sounds confusing, but it's actually pretty simple. Let's take a look. Let's change this to be cube, but let's make this a 3 and this a 4. So see how I have coefficients on those x cubes now? But the numerator is a degree 3 polynomial and the denominator is a degree 3 polynomial. So what does that mean? Think about again, when I start throwing really, really large x values into this expression, well, they're both are degree 3, which means the numerator is growing at roughly the same rate as the denominator. They grow together. One doesn't dwarf the other one because they're both cubics, so they're growing at the same rate. However, the top one is being multiplied by 3, and the bottom one is being multiplied by 4. That's what they're talking about in here when they talk about a divided by b. They're talking about, for us, that would be 3 divided by 4. So for us, this problem should have a horizontal asymptote of y equals 3/4, and sure enough, that looks right on the graph, doesn't it? Looks like it's doing what it's supposed to. Okay, so that's how you get that horizontal asymptote. And then the third one is the easiest one of all. If the degree of the numerator is greater than the degree of the denominator, there is no horizontal asymptote. It doesn't exist because then what's happening is the numerator is blowing up faster than the denominator. So think about a fraction. Big numerator, small denominator, the number blows up towards infinity. So we don't get this leveling off behavior. We get a shooting up towards infinity or negative infinity behavior. So if you can kind of think your way through that, think about the anatomy of a fraction, you can just remember these easily and not try to memorize them, which just doesn't work, okay? And if you can get to where you're comfortable with those, when we start calling them limits here, it's one of the many things that we'll be calling limits in a few weeks from now. You'll go, oh yeah, this is just those horizontal asymptotes he talked about a couple weeks ago. Yeah, it is the same thing, just with a new label on it, okay? So I would say it's definitely worth your time right now to get comfortable with this gray box on page 56. Make sure you understand that. If you need to play around with it in Desmos, just like I did, then play around with it. 5 minutes of like experimenting with it, with the degree of your numerator and denominator and changing the coefficients in front. A lot of times for students, just that 5 minutes of playing around, you go, okay, this makes a lot more sense than just trying to read that gray box. Okay, but it trust me, it will pay off for you. Many students struggle with limits on the first. Limits are one of those things where like people struggle with it at first, and then usually later they're like, why was that ever hard? That wasn't even hard at all. But when it's new, it's confusing. So the better you understand asymptotes going into it, at least that aspect of limits will come quite quickly for you. Okay, let's see. That kind of does it for the problems we'll get. Let's see. So there's a question here in 1.5, question 7. If it would have used 11 months, our equation would have been. don't have the problem, I won't have time to pull it up immediately. If you want to talk about that problem, we can look at it in office hours. But yeah, you have a different choice about how you use your time unit for these different problems. Usually, if we're going to do those equations, we usually do it in terms of years. It's pretty standard to just use years in terms of that equation. But it just kind of depends. As long as you keep track of the unit you're using, then you have a little bit of flexibility about how you do it. Okay. So, like I say, feel free to meet me in office hours if you like. So, sort of recap for the class. Things important going forward. Your homework's due soon. Make sure you get as much of that homework done that you can. Remember, you do get to work on the homework after the due date, but it's only for half credit. So you don't want half credit. Homework should be, if you're doing things well, the homework grade should be pulling your grade up in this class, right? So you really want that homework to be up in the 90s, which is pretty doable, right? As long as you put the effort in, you should be able to get your homework up in the 90s, because when you get something wrong, it gives you like a chance to still get those points. So if your homework is up in the 90s, even if your test score is coming a little lower than you like, then that homework pulls it up. What you don't want to do is get like a mediocre or disappointing grade on the exam, and then you were kind of lazy about the homework, and that pulls your grade down even lower, right? You want that homework pulling things up towards the top. Some of you will get A's on both things, but many of you will not. So that homework is one of those things. If you put in the effort, at least you have a little bit of a safety net, right? Going for you. So remember, I have to drop people later this week. I don't have that many people that I'm looking like I'm going to have to drop. But again, it's very helpful if you have some assignments done so that I can justify, no, this person, they're behind, but they are doing some work in the class, and they're progressing. Plus, the stuff's due, I don't know, is it Sunday or Monday that it's due? So you kind of want to make sure you're progressing on it anyways, because you have 6 assignments due pretty soon. I have office hours. The tutoring center has Zoom meetings available, and this chapter, they should totally be able to help you with everything in this chapter. Some of the later stuff like marginal cost and elasticity, sometimes the tutors get a little confused because they've never taken this class, but like chapter 1, they can help you with everything in chapter 1. And then not a bad idea to form a study group. If you're thinking that might be helpful to you, feel free. If there's a request, I can open up a discussion board so you can all help form your own study groups if you would like that. We can do all of those things. So, yeah, basically make sure you're doing some homework, and I will see you next week. And then I believe, yeah, so where we're at next week is we'll start in on chapter 2. Yeah, and we should be able to get some good discussions on chapter 2. I kind of wish we were in a classroom together for that discussion because, like I say, limits confuse people a little bit, but we'll be fine online. We'll definitely make it work, and it'll be perfectly fine. So thanks, everybody. So I'm going to shut down the YouTube stream. We've hit the 90 minutes where the administration doesn't want us to go longer than 90 minutes on Zoom. So when we are in class, we will meet for the full class time, which is just shy of 2 hours. But for right now, they don't want us doing an hour and 50 minutes on Zoom. They want us to cap it at 90 minutes. But when we're in class, we'll do the full time. So make sure you're getting all prepared for being on campus in a couple weeks, 3 weeks or something. And then make sure you're doing some homework and stuff like that. And see me with questions or advice or whatever it is that you need. Okay, thanks, everybody. Anyone who wants to stick around and talk to me, just stick around in Zoom and you can talk to me. All right, good work, everybody.